For our final job role spotlight of the day, we're going to be focusing on cyber threat intelligence, or sometimes we call it CTI. Now, this might not be a career option that many of you have considered, but I'd be willing to bet that, at least for a lot of you in that boat, it's because you might not even have known that it existed, or maybe you didn't know very much about it. But really, CTI is a very cool field. CTI analysts often get a better backstage or behind the scenes look at real threat actors in the wild than anyone else in security. So it's a fascinating career field, and there's no one better to tell you what it's like to be in CTI than Amy Bejtlich. Now, Amy is Director of Intelligence Analysis at the industrial cybersecurity firm Dragos. She's got over a decade of intelligence experience, both in and out of cyber. So she started off, I think, in the more traditional intelligence roles as an intelligence officer in the US Air Force, and then worked as a counterterrorism analyst with the FBI. But she also does have extensive experience with cyber threats in financial, telecommunications, industrial, and infrastructure areas. So Amy has pre-recorded her presentation today, but if I understand correctly, she will also be in her hallway channel, so you can still ask her your questions. So thanks, Amy's video. Please take it away.
Hi, I'm Amy Bejtlich. I'm the Director of Intelligence Analysis at Dragos, and I'm really happy today to present today's Career Spotlight on Threat Intelligence for the SANS New to Cyber Summit. My talk today will cover, first of all, my background, then an overview of threat intelligence as a whole, and then I'll talk about the interplay between traditional intelligence and threat intelligence. After that, I'll cover some specific aspects of threat intelligence, such as threat intelligence levels, audiences, and types of products, functions that align with threat intelligence competencies, and I'll highlight some potential, but certainly not all-encompassing threat intelligence career paths. I'll point out some of the resources that I recommend, and then finally, I'll leave you with my advice for pursuing this path. First of all, a little bit about me. I started my career in traditional intelligence. I joined the Air Force out of college after graduating with a political science degree with a concentration in Asian studies. From there, I went to Intel School, which was broken up into two parts. The first part was the Fundamentals of Intelligence course, and that was about 9 months. And there I learned technical concepts like maps, charts, geodesy, orbital mechanics, aircraft recognition, things like that. But I also learned intelligence tradecraft, things like collections and report writing and presentation. After fundamentals, there was a follow-on course, and we were split into either Alpha, which was collections, or Bravo, which was applications. And I took the Alpha route with the idea of working in signals intelligence. My first job out of Intel School was as a watch officer working 24/7 ops at Air Intelligence Agency. Eventually, I moved over to watch director overseeing all 4 of the teams. And after about 2 years there, I moved into the Measures and Signatures Intelligence Office, MASIN office, as a project manager. My next Intel job was as a counterterrorism analyst at the FBI. And then my last kind of major career pivot was moving into threat intel, first for a financial institution, and then for a Fortune 15 company. Working for both of those companies, I was working on the enterprise side of threat intelligence. Most recently, I joined Dragos and focused now more on the industrial control systems side of threat intelligence. So my journey started out very broad, and over the course of my career has become much more specific and more specialized. But I like to say that the common denominator is that I consider myself an intelligence professional by nature, by training, and by experience. So I'm really happy to talk to anybody who might be considering pursuing a career in threat intelligence. So let's begin by level setting for those who may not be as familiar with the field. Threat intelligence is a subject of, it's a subset of the larger traditional discipline of intelligence. So many threat intelligence processes and concepts are built on that traditional framework. Much like the broader discipline, there's really not a singularly agreed upon definition for threat intelligence. And even though that's true, that there's no agreed upon definition, we do have some common themes that consistently emerge and can inform our understanding. Threat intelligence, first and foremost, is evidence-based, actionable knowledge. All of those are important about adversaries, their tactics, tools, and procedures, and the vulnerabilities those adversaries could exploit to further their objectives. So keywords there. First, knowledge. It's not just raw data, but it's information plus context. The second is actionable. So information is collected, it's contextually enriched, it's analyzed and shared in ways that enable customers at all levels, from defenders to senior level decision makers, to recommend or implement responses that improve the security posture, reduce harm, and protect the organization. Sometimes threat intelligence is mistakenly thought of as a collection of indicators of compromise, or it's limited to information about specific security threats. But that's a mistake. If an organization doesn't understand its assets, its infrastructure, and its business operations, it won't understand how malicious actors may exploit the organization or understand what defensive measures might protect it. So that's where threat intelligence can help the organization. It can identify and address potential threats targeting the organization and vulnerabilities in the environment that might be exploited. In both disciplines, the traditional intel and threat intel, the product that results from transforming this raw data, those indicators, for example, plus the contextualized information that brings about a knowledge and awareness to mitigate a threat, is a result of a process of planning, collecting, processing, analyzing, and disseminating information to meet customers' requirements. So that's really fundamentally what we call the intelligence cycle. Traditional intelligence is not new. Spying is mentioned in Homer's Iliad, it's in the Bible. The Roman Empire collected information about neighboring nations, and there were works on information gathering written in China as early as 500 BC. So it's a very old discipline. But despite threat intelligence being based on a discipline that's steeped in history, it's really relatively nascent or in its infancy as we know it. Mike Kloppert, the co-lead author of the original SANS Forensics 578 class and co-author of the widely used cyber kill chain paper from Lockheed Martin, wrote that he came to adopt the term cyber threat intelligence in 2012. This Google Trends screenshot here shows that we only start to see a steady search trend start in November of 2012. The first SANS CTI Summit was in March of 2013, and the first SANS Forensics 578 Cyber Threat Intelligence course was taught in 2014. So really, to the general public, the concept of threat intelligence, again, as we know it, as a distinct function, has really only been around for slightly less than 10 years. And because threat intelligence is relatively new, many organizations struggle to adapt, operationalize, and mature their threat intel programs. So threat intelligence is still maturing as a discipline, but that's not to say that there will or should be a standardized approach to threat intelligence. It's not a one size fits all, and it really needs to be specifically catered or tailored to the needs of each organization. Knowing that organizations have relatively little some little history to model their threat intelligence programs after. The way they structure their programs and their teams varies widely. I've seen some threat intel organizations that broke out their teams by internal sources of information and external sources of information. I've seen tactical and strategic. My own team right now, we're broken out by analysis, operations, and research. Really the best way to organize a program depends on the organization's needs and the maturity of the team. So that said, there are some broad strokes that we can paint for kind of how we identify threat intelligence activity and the different levels and roles and the value that it provides. So shown here, I have strategic and operational and tactical. That's definitely based on a traditional intel paradigm. In this layout, the audience goes from the broadest view at the strategic level to the most technical at the tactical level. And you see some examples of the types of information that would be most useful to those audiences. Generally speaking, I would say that one analyst wouldn't specialize across all levels. It is possible, it does happen, but it's very difficult. And in my own opinion, I think that very few people can be experts covering such a wide range of skill sets. So I think this is really good, though, to know if you're starting out in your career to really understand where your skills might be best utilized, but also maybe where you want to go with your skill set. So within those broad levels, let's take a look now at some of the applications and a very brief snapshot of what they entail. Some threat intel teams include these positions and these functions, and others work closely with dedicated teams that include these functions. So like I said, it's really different depending on organization. And this is no way an exhaustive list. First application is threat landscapes. You know, it's important for a security function to know what are the crown jewels of the organization, what groups might target it, what's the organization's attack surface. This is really starting from the basics. Also, campaign analysis, for example, phishing. That specific use case often overlaps with malware analysis since it's a common delivery method. Who was targeted? What was the frequency? By what method? Have others with similar personas been targeted? It's important information to know. Another application is threat actor tracking. That involves analyzing the evolution of threat actors or activity groups and their tactics, techniques, and procedures. Who are they targeting and how are they facilitating their operations? Intelligence requirements is another application. In some organizations, that's an ops support role. It's not even a dedicated intel role, but simply stated, it's identifying the priorities for the focus of intelligence activities. Current intelligence provides stakeholders with situational awareness. In my opinion, it's not the greatest use of intelligence, or at least it's not often applied in the best way, but many organizations have a requirement to produce a current intel product. Another very common or a very common and widely used application for intelligence is for threat detection and hunting. Detection is using intel to identify indicators and create signatures that alert on matches in your environment. Detection is matching, basically. Hunting is establishing hypotheses of where to look for activity that either bypassed detections or it hasn't been identified yet. Hunting is a much more creative endeavor, thinking about the possibilities of what we might find or what we could see if we kind of drew out what we know about our adversaries and what we know about our environment. So next we look at forensics. That's network or host-based investigations of malicious activity to identify new indicators and signatures. And then analysts investigate, enrich, and pivot on those indicators. So it's a virtuous process. And that leads us to malware analysis. which is investigating what specific malware does and how it does it. The application of threat intelligence to incident response accelerates the time it takes incident responders to identify and assess vulnerabilities, threats, and attacks, while prioritizing what to remediate or what to mitigate first. And finally, vulnerability and risk management. It involves researching software or hardware vulnerabilities in the environment and identifying which controls to mitigate that risk. Those, like I said, not an exhaustive list, but those are some applications of Intel that feeds processes, but it also receives information from those processes. So I've talked about ways organizations may implement threat intelligence. I've talked about some applications that provide and receive value to and from threat intelligence. Now I want to cover a more personal aspect of the profession, and that's the attributes that might help somebody to be successful in this role. In general, threat intelligence, threat analysts are inquisitive and persistent. They're critical thinkers and they're problem solvers. I do like these 6 categories of threat intelligence competencies that were taken from the Intelligence and National Security Alliance Cyber Intelligence Task Force. I think it covers a very wide swath, but it's very appropriate. The first one is critical thinking, which entails problem solving, hypothesis development, which we've already discussed slightly, and having sound research methods and applications, which is critical, in my opinion, as an intelligence analyst. The next is data collection and examination, being able to process a lot of data and information and determine what's most important and what's noise. That there's a lot of information coming in all the time, so that's really important. The third competency is communication and collaboration. Things like writing, public speaking, team building, general interpersonal skills. I really believe that being able to speak security to the business unit is an invaluable skill. It's very important for a threat intel professional to be able to understand outside of the security function, what is the business value to threat intelligence and to cybersecurity in general. And being able to speak that and communicate it both verbally and in writing is really valuable. Another skill, and I guess these kind of get more into the traditional what you would expect from a cybersecurity professional, but technical exploitation. I think that varies depending on your organization, your team, even your role, but it's things like malware analysis, penetration testing, social engineering, application security, things like that. And then also information security. These are also specialties, but there is a certain level of awareness that's necessary in order to be successful as a threat analyst or a threat intel professional. And those are vulnerability research, network defense, and incident response. And last but not least, computing fundamentals, understanding networking, operating systems, things like programming and scripting. That's very valuable. Just as there's no cookie cutter for how organizations structure CTI or threat intel programs or what each individual role entails, because there are so many different intersectioning functions and applications, it's hard to have a single cookie cutter path to threat intel. We already noted that threat intel is relatively new, so not many threat analysts have come to the field with a nice, well planned out path. And for many, it's been a very windy road they didn't even know that they were on when they started, but they found out that, excuse me, their experiences lend themselves to the profession. So while not exhaustive, here are a few professions, some obvious, some not, that I think lend themselves to threat intelligence. People who come from law enforcement backgrounds, I think kind of have a natural segue. They have investigative skills. They're used to and adherence to procedures, things like chain of custody, and they understand the forensics process. Those from national security backgrounds also, they understand the geopolitical aspect of threat intelligence, and many have regional and language expertise. Data scientists are experienced at mining, sorting, and synthesizing information, and they can help efficiently make sense out of a ton of information. Those from military intelligence backgrounds like myself have a foundation in intelligence, tradecraft, theories, models, and frameworks, and how to apply them. And journalists are one of my favorites. Intel is, I like to say, Intel is always collecting, so getting products out the door to the user can be a challenge. But journalists not only have strong communication skills, writing and speaking skills, but they're deadline driven, and they can really provide that sense of urgency to getting the intelligence actually in the hands of the user so they can do something about it. And finally, cybersecurity professionals. They make great intelligence analysts, obviously, because they have the technical proficiency. And in my opinion, they really understand. There's no better way to understand the application of threat intelligence. So regardless of the path that brought you to considering threat intelligence as a career, how do you prepare yourself? There are a lot of paths to becoming a security professional. Some people take the path of studying, they do certifications. Another path is taking the educational route. Some have found that intelligence just came naturally as a second profession based on their previous career choices. It really doesn't matter what path you take because, like I said earlier, there is no right path. But I do think that there are some general categories to consider when you're building out your professional development. And I have 3 of them here. The first is threat intelligence awareness. It's incumbent upon you to understand what's going on in the field, in the community. So I recommend building RSS feeds, things like going out and finding vendors, keywords, cybersecurity news outlets, and keeping up with their reporting on a daily basis. I also recommend following social media. Twitter's great for identifying people who have a lot to say about the security field. Also, lists and hashtags, easy to follow and put into your feed. I also recommend reading blogs and listening to podcasts from vendors and researchers, and really people at every level of career development. They have, many people have something to say about the field. It's not just people who have been around for a long time, and that can be really valuable. The next area I think is education. It's really important, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be something that is formalized, and it doesn't have to be something that is paid for. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. For some of the free or self-initiated efforts, it's easy enough to go to YouTube, to look online for professional reading lists, read Department of Justice cyber indictments. Those are great. Watch webinars, create a home lab, and play with open source tools. All of that is really valuable for really understanding how to apply the craft of threat intelligence. You can also look into formal programs. Like I said, there are undergraduate or graduate degrees in cybersecurity, or even specifically in threat intelligence. And there are a lot of training programs and certification programs, just like SANS, for example, but there are many others. Lastly, I think it's really important to network and get to know people in the community. Follow people on LinkedIn and Twitter. Join affinity groups or local meetups, go to conferences, either paid or for free. It's a great place to meet people and to learn while you're at it. So how do we put that all together? Here's my recommendation. I recommend you explore publicly available resources like news reports and blog posts and indictments that cover cyber attacks or vulnerabilities. Read all that you can. And I actually try to block my calendar so I have time to read, not necessarily daily, but if you can do it daily, that would be great. And take advantage of all the open source tools that you can play around with. And from that preliminary investigation of what you know that or what you learn that is going on in the community, choose one or two aspects that are really interesting to you and zero in on learning everything that you can about those. And then follow on learning with things like tutorials, either free or paid, that explain those topics in further detail. So you really start to understand and really grow the breadth and depth of your knowledge. And with that, maybe you can go participate in a capture the flag, or you can reach out to a local group like B-Sides and submit a CFP to present on what you learned and how you got there. That's really valuable. People who are just starting maybe feel like they don't have a lot to contribute, but having an understanding of how you got from just starting out to really getting your bearings in the field could help somebody else come along behind you. So that is really valuable and it's appreciated. The bottom line is that a key differentiator for success in the field is having a passion for threat intelligence and then being able to translate that passion into developing your skills and contributing to the larger community. So I started out really broadly with the discipline of intelligence, and I finished with specific actions that you can take to prepare yourself for your cybersecurity or threat intelligence, hopefully, career. But my final recommendations that I'd like to leave you with are these. It's awesome to be a lifelong learner, and you really have to do that in cybersecurity. Take ownership of your professional development, ask questions, be hands-on. Connect, explore different tracks, different roles, different specialties. There's a lot. Cybersecurity is huge. Threat intel is huge. So really explore what options are available to you. Ask questions. Ask, for guidance. Look for mentors. But also don't expect somebody else to do that for you. Really own that role, like I said earlier. Be an active member of the professional community. Next, I would say build your communication skills. I think we hear the term soft skills, and it's a little bit, I think it doesn't give full credit to the fact that being able to communicate security, it's not just on a low level. That's all across an organization. To be able to communicate the value of what you do and why it matters to the organization is really important. So I recommend continuously refining writing and public speaking skills. Learn to speak security to other teams and departments in your organization in ways that matter to them. And then finally, evolve. I think, as I said, there are no direct paths. And nothing has to be permanent. So don't be afraid to branch out and try something new. Be bold and see if it's something that maybe you're great at. So that's all I have today. And I thank you for your time. I'm always happy to talk about threat intelligence. So if you have any questions or concerns that you'd like to talk to me about, please hit me up. I'm Silent J on Twitter, but I will also be in the Slack channel. Thank you so much.